There was a minimum of 32 feet.
That's if it's a public road. These are proposed private streets.
Okay.
32 between the buildings.
Between the buildings, okay. I thought it was from the road and the buildings, okay.
20 for
between those
6
two
more
buildings. All right,
units.
great, thank you. And I thought that was accounted for because of the road cutting through, it wasn't a private. I thought it was considered a public road because of the tie-in to the Brandywine things. Okay, thanks, Jay. I was just trying to remember, it's been a while. Thank you. Okay.
Allison, who can speak to how you're proposing to have trash delivery?
Vendors. I
Okay.
was going to ask that question first.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question about parking. Overflow parking, has that been studied? I mean, perfect example, my neighbor across the street just had a high school graduation party. There was about I actually counted them because I wanted to have a nice data point for today. There was like 16 cars that were there attending the party. You know, as far as the project goes, I mean, where are, you know, people going to park outside of the folks that live there? So their spaces will probably be occupied by their everyday cars. I mean, where, you know, people have social functions, people have birthday parties, people have bar mitzvahs, you know, the whole nine. Like, where are people going to go? Where are they going to park?
Again, I think Mr. Penders, Mr. Daly testified to the technical requirements. Related to conversations and things he said.
Okay. With that, do you want to turn to Mr. Penders then? And I was remiss in not pointing out,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
sir, you need to come forward, and you need to use a microphone, and you need to speak slowly if you can, please.
Hold it away, a foot.
Hold it away from you and speak slowly.
Probably this question was already asked. If so, I apologize. Is there a plan for the school bus to go into that community?
It was already asked. He indicated that most likely, that's a school district question, but that Mr. Williams testified that most likely the school bus will stop on 322, and they'll probably arrange the route so that the kids would not have to cross over 322. But that's something that the school district will determine, and it'll happen at a later date if this goes forward.
Okay, thank you. But that's safety of 15 families' children we're talking about on 322. So that is something that needs to be considered. 15 families' children coming out to the main road, so we need to make sure we consider that. Yeah, so the question was answered, and the school district will evaluate that.
Yes.
Was it? All right, thank you.
I actually have a question. The wall in the front of the development, do you know what, by the municipal code, what the max height of a wall in front of the?
The maximum height for a retaining wall, I don't believe there is I don't think there's a requirement for a maximum height on a retaining wall, structural retaining wall.
Well, it's just a wall. I don't know. I mean, a wall is a wall. I don't know if it's designated retaining. 'Cause I think the max height by code is 5 feet. 6 feet. So the wall is 7 feet. So is that another thing that the board has to grant a variance on that, or?
Is the pillar 7 foot and you have like a 30-inch wrought iron fence, or is that the actual wall itself?
The actual wall itself. My understanding of that 6-foot high
399,
requirement was
77.
for just a sitting wall, let's say. Cannot extend more than 6 feet
I
high.
think you're going to be higher.
Could you sit on a
connected
6-foot
to
high
the
wall?
Building
Well,
itself.
I know, I'm just saying a decorative wall.
So I mean, I just want to clarify then. So the wall, so the wall, the height of the wall doesn't meet the code.
I don't know if that's the case. 399.77 is the applicable section of the zoning, height limitations of fences and walls. And it says, except for the requirements in section 12 of the Township Junkyard and Refuse Ordinance, or a retaining wall, or a wall of a building, no fence or wall erected within any required yard area shall exceed 6 feet in height, unless that portion of the fence or wall which exceeds 6 feet in height has a ratio of open area to solid area of at least 4 to 1. So I'm not familiar enough with the details on their wall.
Well,
And-
I would have to assume it is retaining, and it said, and not meaning retaining going back to the first, because if
Right.
it's got to be retaining if there's soil behind it.
It is a retaining wall.
So that there's not a height requirement or height limitation on a retaining wall?
No, it was focusing on, can you read the first
Or
sentence?
it says, or a retaining wall, so that it's an exception made for a retaining wall.
But would it fall under the section for the town, for the trash, what it said?
I don't think so. I think, because the comma goes before the or, so I think there is not a limitation on the height of a retaining wall. But we can, I mean, again, just so you understand the context, the zoning officer, the township civil engineer, and the planning commission have reviewed this. And those are things that they would have picked up in their review. Doesn't mean we can't look at it again, but I believe that the proposed retaining wall has been reviewed and found to be compliant with the code.
Okay. So does the wall, is there an actual formal streetscape, like, I don't know how it would be, like, I guess the village plan, does having a wall in front of it really fit into what they had in mind for?
I mean, that is something, and actually, it's a good prelude into what I was going to say, is that after the last hearing, the township staff reached out to the township planner, Mr. Comita, who wrote the TND regulations and who wrote the design guidelines for the TND district, and he reviewed the plan. And I have a new board exhibit to introduce, it's board exhibit, 17, which is a memorandum dated June 4th, 2018, from the township planner, Thomas Comita. I have extra copies of that, but Mr. Comita reviewed this, and I think Mr. Penders will speak to his conversations that he had with Mr. Comita even preceding this letter. So I have extra copies if anybody wants to grab a copy of that letter. And I'd like to mark that as Board Exhibit 17. Allison, do you have any objection to that being marked as a board exhibit? Okay, so here's additional copies. But I do believe that the wall and the streetscape is something that they plan to be consistent with what the TND regulations and the design guidelines called for.
Sounds like a poor design.
Give
Okay.
another one.
You have them. Didn't I give them to you guys?
Yeah.
B-17?
It's in this pack.
It's the last one.
page of your pack. That pack. 17.
And I wasn't able to provide it to you because I got it yesterday. I had to make sure that the applicant's counsel had no objection to it being introduced as an exhibit.
See, it worked, because we didn't know until tonight.
Okay, so are there any more questions for Mr. Daly? All right, let's move on. You were going to call Mr. Penders again.
Yes.
And he was sworn at the last hearing and is still under oath.
Yes.
Thank you. Do you need a break, Jen? Okay. Thank you.
Before we get started on reviewing this letter, there are a few other cleanup items that I'd like to have you address. Mr. Fisher asked a question earlier about postal delivery and trash collection. Can you address how each one of those will be accomplished?
Sure. With respect to mail delivery, we're proposing a community mailbox location within the community that's adjacent to the 4 overflow parking spaces that we referred to before at this location right here on the plan. That is how we've had a number of other townhouse communities serviced by the post office elsewhere. So there would be direct postal delivery to boxes there, and the residents would pick up at that location. The box itself is owned by the homeowners association.
Is the box big enough to handle Amazon packages?
Generally, these boxes include 1 or 2 oversize, and there's a key system that allows a drop to that, and then the resident uses that to open for the oversized packages. My expectations is probably a 2-box, based on the sizes that are generally available, that we'd have two box units next to each other at that location. So, and with respect to, I believe trash removal was the other question. In that case, what we're expecting here is private trash collection at the curb for each unit. We're not expecting any kind of community dumpster or anything like that. We would have individual cans through a private provider. That would be an association responsibility to contract for that and have trash removed.
And have you looked at, or in your opinion, do you think that the access driveway will provide, appropriate circulation for a trash vehicle to be able to provide service to each of the 15 homes?
We've not had problems in similar communities. I've not spoken directly with any of our vendors for this neighborhood. They have a variety of truck sizes we've used in other communities that would facilitate access if necessary.
I can't even remember if we touched upon this, but how about for snow plowing?
The streets are proposed to be private and owned by the association. The sidewalks as well as the driveways, et cetera, will all have snow removal by the association contractor. So they'll
I'm more worried
mobilize and
about where
have
to
that.
put it than who does it. If you look at in front of the units, if you push left, you're gonna be. I'm just trying to go off of this map. It's a small view, but your property lines are very tight. So are you clogging spots, the overflow spots with snow on this end? If you push to the left, you're not on your property. I'm going between the top units right now. If you are going uphill with the snow coming in off of 322, you're gonna block the units' driveways at the right. I mean, I've plowed snow for 30 years, and I'm looking at this, just thinking of, I don't know if we talked about it or not before.
I think it was raised as an issue in terms of where you'll put the snow. Do you ever have any of your homeowners associations contract with a snow plower that has to remove the snow from the site completely?
Generally, we're contracting based on inches of snowfall, and the residents are expecting clean driveways, clean access to the streets, and so the vendor, what you're describing, I think, is less of an issue in the 2 to 4 inch events. When you get a larger event, then you have a full shovel loader crew on site already, because a lot of this work is handwork. So in that case, I've had experiences in larger snow events where it's trucked off.
So, because you were talking about putting your mailboxes up by the overflow spots. Indicated here. In the grass.
Yeah, it's outside the curb there, yes. Yeah, the roadways at each end there, just past Unit 6 on the lower roadway and just past Unit 15 at the upper end, have an extension area that is really designed to serve as a turnaround for folks exiting the driveway. But in the case of a short term of a snow event, there's certainly room there to keep it out, to help push it to the end, because that's a curbed, paved area there.
I continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
Next, let's turn to water and sewer easements. You heard Mr. Daly testify to the relocated water and sewer easements, and there were some questions at the last hearing about whether any fencing or screening could be installed in the new sewer and water easement locations on the plan to create a boundary or screening between the Hopewell development and this new development. First, there was some comment or question about an existing fence on that property line, and did you verify a little more history about that and determine how that got there and what it is?
Yeah. After our last meeting, I had gone on the record that fence was installed after the project, and I had a nagging feeling, and so I went back to my email records from 16 years ago, and I found that I was involved in getting Yerkes and Mr. Pearsall at the time to get that fence approved. So, in fact, it was installed, as correctly stated by the Hopewell residents, by Rouse Chamberlin. It was a combination of post and rail, and also, I believe, a shadow box that ran across a number of those units there. So, I apologize for my error before, but yes. So that fence, as it relates to the backs here of units what was lot 101 at Hopewell and 100 as a post and rail, by Rouse Chamberlin.
And that fence is still today standing?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Next, turning to the water easement, which would be relocated to the northern property line, or I should say, to the north side of the property. Have you reached out to Aqua and asked whether you'd be able to install any fencing or screening over that new projected easement location?
Yes, we have had a number of conversations since the last hearing. The easement is fairly specific that other kinds of structures are not permitted in the easement. But we went back and worked directly with their new business folks and their kind of construction people there. And Aqua advised that they would, in this case, allow a fence to be installed with some criteria that requires it to be perpendicular to the easement area and the water line. So in other words, they want to make sure it's not running along the pipe, but directly 90-degree angle to it, which works extremely well in this circumstance. The water line itself is running in a north-south direction here, so that would afford us an opportunity to run the fence kind of east-west along the rear property line. They have some additional criteria about where we have to put the post for the fence and separations from the water lines and things like that, which we feel comfortable we can work with Aqua on. So.
And again, related to the sewer line, did you ask the same question of the East Brandywine Township Municipal Authority since our last meeting?
We have, and the authority has been cooperative in willingness to work with us on a similar arrangement here, where again, not permitted, but they're willing here to make an accommodation, again, sensitive to the depth of the posts that we would install and ensuring that those are not placed too close to the pipe itself. And the sections of the pipe, of the fence itself, as you can imagine, have to kind of bridge the pipe in a way that you have this posts on one side that's as far from the pipe as possible, and the post on the other side that's as far away as possible. So that's something we need to finalize with the authority and get a specific approval from them during land development, but we feel comfortable that we can extend that fence, again, the rest of the way across, not just the Aqua portion, but also the municipal authority easement portion along that back line. So that would afford us the opportunity to continue that fence line along the full rear property line compared to last discussion when we thought we had to stop short of that easement area.
So the proposed 6-foot-high privacy fence that you have on your Exhibit A5, you're saying, based on your conversations with Aqua and the municipal authority, you can revise that plan to extend it to the property boundary?
That's correct. 6 foot plus the 2 foot of privacy above that,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Next, turning to the exhibit that was just marked as, mail letter was marked as exhibit
B17.
17. Have you had a chance to review that letter?
A little bit, yes, yes, yes.
Turning to that letter, I don't know if everybody has a copy of that, because
I just,
it's going to be kind of complicated to follow this
Yeah, I just-
testimony without seeing.
there's a bunch out there, right?
Number 17, is that?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, I handed them.
Okay.
Okay, I just
So I
wanted to
brought a
make
bunch,
sure.
yeah.
Okay. Comment 1 in that letter talks about layout consideration. And I know that there have been several questions during the course of this hearing about the TND guidelines and setbacks from 322 and the placement of the units, the orientation of them. Could you give us a little bit of background and history on sort of your analysis through the process, working with Mr. Schmidt or working with the Planning Commission, Historical Commission, and how you got to the design that we're presenting today?
Sure. I think I'd like to use our new plan for that, if we can swap in the new exhibit.
We have marked as Exhibit A21, cross-section, which I will hand out to everybody.
Thank you.
Sorry, 821 that was marked? Okay. No, I'm going to use this up here.
Before we get into
yeah,
that, just
sorry.
to set up what it is this cross-section that was prepared by Seidel Planning and Design due 2018.
Yes, it is.
And is this an update to a cross-section that we had marked as part of Exhibit A1 that Seidel prepared January 25th, 2017?
Yeah, yes, it is, exactly.
Okay, and go ahead and explain what this is and why you had this prepared.
Sure. So the January 2017 cross-section exhibit was part of, again, the original, was it A5?
Part of A1.
A1, I'm sorry, A1 package there. This was a document that was prepared about a year and a half ago, and we thought there were a number of details on that that were not consistent with the current zoning compliance map and the engineering that has sort of, we've all worked through with the Planning Commission, Historical Commission in the time past. So the new exhibit A21 has a key map which is matching the present proposed plan and the landscape plan there. And the illustrative section A is a cross-section of the overall plan itself. And so our intent here was to make sure we were working from the most current set of details in terms of the plan for our discussion there. On that. You able to zoom out on the, get the, or do I need to move it around there? Thank you. Sir? So this exhibit was prepared back in January of 17 as a follow-up to what was really our first round of sketch discussions on the property, which happened late in 2016. And the challenge with this property and sort of our discussions when they started with the staff and with Mr. Kamitta's office at that time and with the Planning Commission was really trying to understand the two dimensions of this particular piece of property, which is a fairly consistent square box, but has a number of different things going on topographically. And so when we first came in with our plans in late 16, one of the first lines of questioning was, how does this plan really jibe with the spirit of the TND ordinance? And why were you designing it with the specific set of criteria? How did you end up with the plan you did? And what was useful for us, what we thought in kind of going back, is to help everybody understand how we were attempting to work with the unique site conditions and how we were looking to work with the topography of the site in order to come up with the most attractive community, meaning attractive overall for the larger East Brandywine community, as well as for minimizing the impact on all the surroundings, meaning the neighbors on all sides here, including 322, including the Hopewell development. So at that time, what was shown here, and it's the same plan as I have before you here as A21, is really a perspective on the site as if you're standing somewhere within the Agway property and you're looking across the hillside. We all sort of look at this property out from 322. So we instead took a slice of it from somewhere in the midst of the Agway building. That's exhibited here in the key map. You can kind of see what Seidel is doing is taking a slice through here of the property and turning it into the profile below.
For the record, Village Harbor, because Agway, you're going back, you might be confusing.
I'm sorry.
I was going to say he's showing his age. Built Hopewell years ago.
I remembered that, but I couldn't remember the fence. So, what we're trying to do here in terms of the profile and what the design is attempting to do is to build these units into the hillside itself, as opposed to either driving the property all the way down to a grade level with extensive retaining walls throughout the site, or propping the site up. So that would drive it all the way down here across the site, or propping the site all the way up, and I exaggerate here, but propping it all the way up and having the whole site raised into the air. And the conversation that we had back in 2017 on this was, a lot of it was focused on this front building. And both with Mr. Committa's office and with the Planning Commission, the discussion was, how do we want to access this particular building within the site? The TND ordinance, when it was originally drafted in 13, and there were a number of discussions, community discussions, planning discussions, everything like that, this particular property, and I think a number of the other properties on this side of Horseshoe Pike, were not actually within that core zone of the TND. At that time, the TND was really talked about on the other side of Horseshoe Pike. So the meetings I know that folks from my office had attended back then really said this is going to remain village commercial, and the rest was going to be the TND 1. And so a lot of the ordinance writing was focused on that at that time. At the end of the day, I think it was in 2014, ultimately, when it was passed, the whole village commercial ordinance did go away, and the area on this side of Horseshoe Pike became part of that TND 1 ordinance. So as it applied here to this particular building, one of the primary points of conversation was, what are we doing facing driveways on the Horseshoe Pike? Isn't that exactly contrary to what we were talking about in terms of the TND 1 ordinance? And the discussion we had with Mr. Committa's office at the time in a work session in December, and a lot of the conversations and sort of back and forth we had with your Planning Commission and even your Historical Commission in 2017 was a function of, is it better to keep this building low and have the driveway in front, with the idea of using a wall feature at the street in order to create the break between Horseshoe Pike and the house in the driveway? Or if we turn the building around so that the driveway is facing the north, the interior road here, then we end up raising the buildings up higher on the site, and we end up with a much larger massing from Horseshoe Pike. I believe at that point everyone was in keeping with the idea that we hold everything back a reasonable distance from Horseshoe Pike, keeping it in line with the pharmacy property, and really allowing that to be consistent on the one side of the street. So there was a lot of discussion of which way do we end up facing this, how high do we make this front building. And the final decision there, or at least what we moved forward from the Planning Commission discussion, was introduce a wall element and allow the driveways in the front, subject to a lot of scrutiny from the Historical Commission in terms of the aesthetics of that building being very critical, but in the whole idea of driving everything lower on the property as opposed to raising it up.
So based on that, going back to Mr. Committa's letter, you're essentially addressing and explaining how we got there, which is part of some of the design considerations he laid out. And there are really two parts to this letter. One is comments, and then one is recommended conditions, if the board is so inclined. And a lot of them overlap, so not to belabor it, we were going to have you walk through, starting on page 3, that set of comments / conditions, and have you address each one of those, since they really are almost repetitive. So turning to page 3.
Allison, before we
Yes.
do, let's take
Sure.
a 5-minute break.
Oh, yeah,
just
that's-
because
yeah, 'cause it's gonna take a little
she's got a
while.
lot of typing to
Yes.
do, and everybody probably, so let's, at 5 we'll start again, if that's okay.
No problem.
I think we have a quorum. Jason's excused himself, but I think we can go.
Yeah.
So, carry on. Allison had questions, that's all right.
So before we jump into the comments in the review letter, I have one other question for Mr. Penders, just to set up the context with Exhibit A21. Turning back to Exhibit A5, which is our conditional use plan, you were discussing slopes through the site and working the buildings, having those buildings work with the slopes rather than in a different context. Can you point out on Exhibit A5 where the slopes are on the
Sure. Again, the areas of moderate slopes, or the steepest section of the site, are on the upper ends of units 1 through 6 and the connecting roadway here. So sort of the area that we're just discussing here in terms of the upper end of the front building there, 1 through 6, it runs that way, east-west across the property.
And is that shaded in gray on Exhibit A5?
It is, yes.
And that is a light gray?
Yes, it is.
Turning back to the TCA review letter, before the break, I was going to have you walk through, starting on page 3, Mr. Kamitta's comments and address each one of them. The first one relates to providing enhanced layout through greater facade variations in townhouse groups and providing recesses and projecting in the plane of facades. We do have the elevation marked as well if you need to refer to that, but if you could address that.
Sure.
comment.
Again, I'm not sure what plans Mr. Kamitta had specifically in terms of their June 4th review, but to,
He states it on page 1.
oh, does he? There,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
So he had the zoning compliance plan dated April 17th. He had the landscape plan and details from Sidell dated April 17th. He had your proposed cross-sections dated January 25th, 2017, your public realm plan, your proposed front elevation, your Guthriesville Walk Horseshoe Pike perspective dated March 31, and then your manual of written and graphic design guidelines.
Thank you. The Exhibit A5, the design for all of the proposed units includes a facade variation included with all of those. So what we've done is included for, there's, I think it's every 2 units, there's then a vertical break along the front facade of each of those. So I think that we've accommodated that. If Mr. Kamitta is asking for additional facade setback or variation at that point, what it would be doing for us is it would force us to shrink the size and square footage of those units, so we would include a smaller unit there in exchange for the facade variation. That would not be our preference. We'd like to offer larger units if at all possible. But we do feel that we've met the general intent of having facade variation there, as shown on A5.
Second comment, A2, references providing 5 versus 6 townhomes. He's not citing an ordinance section. Can you
Sure. So he's speaking to elimination of a unit on the stretch of building units 1 through 6. He speaks to the fact that this would be more in keeping with the massing. We look quickly at the massing of the Village Hardware and the pharmacy properties on both sides. Both of the scale of the frontage of those units, of those structures, is actually larger than the 120 feet that we have proposed for this building. So we do feel that this is consistent, if a little bit smaller than the structures on each side. The concept of introducing or I guess eliminating in terms of having an additional N unit is, I agree with him that N units are more valuable than interior units. In this particular case, obviously having an additional unit is more valuable than having the benefit of two extra Ns in terms of the marketability there. In addition, I'm concerned about the separations that we had talked about a little bit before in terms of the separation between units there. The requirement, I believe, is 30 feet. So the elimination of one unit is not going to provide a sufficient separation between those units unless the board was willing to look at a narrower separation there. So is my read of the comment A2 is that he is proposing elimination of either unit 4 or 3 in the middle. In other words, it's not taking off a unit at the end. It's actually breaking that into 2 separate buildings.
And following up on that, then, so then what you were saying, if you eliminated one of those buildings, you would not have a 30-foot separation between the 2 blocks of townhouses that are remaining?
That's correct.
Versus removing an end unit would not, that would be a different.
Exactly, yes.
For,
Well, could you, though, design it that it was 5 across, losing one of them? Would that,
There
Give you
would
any
be, I'm sorry, I interrupted you on your question.
no, I mean, I'm just wondering if that's, I mean, again, I haven't looked at the design guidelines, so I'm not sure if what he's talking about in terms of, like you said, what he's trying to achieve through that, but is that, you think he's dealing with the massing of the building as far as the, I don't know.
That's what he seems to be indicating here, and then he's speaking to the fact that having more end units is more marketable. So he's correct that if you split that into 2 buildings, you would go from 4 interior and 2 end units. Our end unit conditions always have many more windows on them for a customer than an interior unit. There's more light. You've got significantly more light into that building. It is a more valuable, more desirable unit. So I agree with him on that. So you would end up with having to create 2 buildings in that stretch. I have 120 feet to do so. Eliminating a unit in the middle of that building creates a 20-foot wide break. Each of these units is 20 feet wide. The zoning specifically requires a 30-foot separation. So when I eliminate that unit, I'm actually forcing them further apart.
in essence, if you did that, you'd really have to, it would really be.
It would be a 2-unit elimination, yes. Again, without some other sort of flexibility in terms of setbacks, but I think it's detailed as 30 feet in the ordinance there.
And to just formally clarify what the section says, in the zoning ordinance, is your understanding that it says building separation distances shall be a minimum of 30 feet to allow for adequate access by emergency service vehicles, and there wouldn't be a vehicle proposed in between those, is that correct?
Correct.
So from your perspective, that relief, even if that were the case and there was relief considered, that design would work with a 20-foot separation?
I think it would work, yes.
Turning to comment B1, that he's recommending providing a pedestrian gathering area / green in a portion of the area currently proposed for stormwater management. And there was an earlier comment in the letter where he references that stormwater management could be underground in order to provide that pedestrian area. And so if you could clarify that in terms of maybe what he was assuming and what's actually shown on the plan.
Right. At the point where we initially talked about this design with Committa's office in 2016, we were proposing an above-ground basin. On the present plan before the board, that basin, after some discussions with the Planning Commission, has become a subsurface basin. So what we're proposing in the area here in the southeast corner is all subsurface detention in a pipe and stone system. It will be grass at the surface. It will look like a small park field lawn. Even in a storm event, it's not like you're going to see water on the surface. There would be some piping there in terms of observation ports, but otherwise I think the plan as presented today meets the request of B1.
Next comment, B2, makes a suggestion of providing a pedestrian gathering area / green between proposed units 11 and 12, and then providing another pedestrian gathering area, which you just addressed. Could you address what's happening between units 11 and 12 and what you think is appropriate for the site?
Sure, and I don't know whether he's suggesting an either or between, if there was a situation where we could not create the green at the basin, and so he's suggesting alternative locations, But when we look specifically at area between units 11 and 12, that's the break at the upper end of the site here. So this is unit 11, this is 12. So we have an area here that, again, in 2 dimensions, looks like a possibility for some sort of gathering area, pedestrian gathering area, or green. But if you remember back to our cross-section and the overall grading vision for the site, from the sidewalk out here to the back of units 11 and 12, we have, I believe, 8 feet of vertical grade at climbing through that area. So it's really a slope up through that area, because again, the units are 3 stories in the front, but they're only 2 in the back. So we make up that grade difference in between the units with the hill itself. So, so you have a small area in the front, but the larger section between units and 11 and 12 itself is really going to be a hillside.
Comment B3 suggests providing a pavilion or enclosure for the mailbox with surrounding landscaping.
I think that that's something that's mentioned in the design guidelines as a desirable feature, and it's certainly something we'd be willing to accommodate and incorporate into the plans here.
C1 talks about providing pedestrian skyways along 22 pursuant to section 11 of the design guidelines. Is that something you can comply with?
We would be happy to comply with that.
Currently, based on the testimony, there was one light proposed at the intersection, is that correct?
That's correct. One at the intersection, yes.
Of the site driveway and Route 322.
Yep.
But you would add more based on that.
Correct, and that's something we can work with the staff and consultants and the planning commission, some combination, either incorporated with the wall itself or freestanding along the frontage there.
C2 references section 8 of the design guidelines. It says, please provide enhanced design with pedestrian amenities for the streets, decorative pavers and planting.
I think that's what the TND is about, so we'd be happy to incorporate those into the plan.
References section 7 of the design guidelines and says, please provide crosswalks or sidewalks, crosswalk cartways, especially across the curb cut along 322. Does the plan actually show these things now?
It does. I think there may be one place where we mislabeled that, but we're certainly willing to comply. That's what we're proposing, so yes.
Comment C4 states provide a sitting wall as part of the retaining wall along Route 322 as a bench/sitting feature, and he provided a few examples with his letter. Did you, you've obviously provided some testimony about part of the wall along the frontage being a sitting wall. Can you elaborate on that further?
Sure. The wall, as you're working from right to left on the plan here, starts on the one side of the driveway as a sitting wall. So it's going to function as a lower wall and meet all the spirit there and the letter of the sitting wall. As we move to the other side of the property, the wall, as mentioned earlier, it also incorporates a retaining wall function because we are going to be filling some amount behind that. So what we've done is we've incorporated through the Planning Commission discussions a stair area, which will function as a seating area. That's just to the left of the entrance drive. In the rest of the frontage, we really don't have a good place to create a sitting wall that's integral to the retaining wall itself. What we'd like to do instead is to work on a series of other sort of gathering areas, whether it's benches or other sorts of freestanding structures that PennDOT will allow us to build and locate in that right-of-way area. So while we really can't change the wall design at that location, we'd like to certainly come up with a way to create the desire for pedestrian-friendly seating stopping areas along there.
C5 suggests providing a stepped wall solution along the horseshoe frontage in order to reduce the massiveness of the wall frontage. I think you just touched on this a bit, but if you could elaborate.
It's the same sort of challenge of introducing a second tier to the wall. What Mr. Kmina's office is suggesting is, creating what would be a lower wall outside of the existing wall structure. I don't have the flexibility to move that wall back into the property. So we would be pushing out beyond the right-of-way line with any sort of stepped wall, which we don't believe the PennDOT is going to be willing to accept. What we had proposed in terms of mitigation to that wall, and we understand that the 7-foot element that is at the western or northern end of the property is the most prominent section, so we have looked very closely at doing additional landscaping and softening of that between the sidewalk and the wall structure itself.
Comment D1 suggests using a non-white color for the garage doors and the bay window.
Sure. Do we want to refer to the architectural exhibit for that?
So we have marked as Exhibit A8, the architectural elevation that was previously passed out.
You gonna try to put that up, Scott? Can you zoom in that far? Okay. So Exhibit A8 is the proposed architecture for the buildings. This is the design that we had worked with the Township's Historical Commission on. That you're gonna, oh, sorry. Worked with the commission on in terms of design and colors and everything else here. The two things that Mr. Kmina's office are pointing out, one is the white garage door elements here, and the second are the white trim around the bay areas themselves. We've certainly spent a lot of time with the Historic Commission in terms of the designs, so I guess I'd want to just mesh their desires with your planning consultant's desires. I have no objection to switching out the garage doors if that's something that everybody wants, to a different tone. I have some concern with the bay structure itself. That's not a siding detail, that's actually all a trim and window detail. And so my preference is certainly to keep that in the white, have that pop a little bit on the plans. But again, it's something I'd really want to sort of get everybody in the room together in terms of Historical Commission and Mr. Kmina's office to accommodate that. So.
Comment D2, again, relates to architecture, and Mr. Kmina suggests varying the building materials for different units by using complementary materials and colors. He states that he believes the variation of materials would improve the vertical expression of the townhomes and be more, have more character and be contextually sensitive. If you could elaborate on, again, what you worked with on the Historical Commission and the materials.
Sure. Mr. Kmina on page 2, item 3.2 mentions that he's asking that we add a materials and colors legend to the elevations. So I understand he's reacting to just a pretty picture, so to speak, and he doesn't have any context as to exactly what colors and what materials we're specifying there. In working with the commission, we've got stone elements, we have standing seam metal roofing elements, we have shake elements, we've got clapboard, we've got beaded side. We have a handful of different elements already incorporated into this. Again, through a lot of, I know, heavy lifting on the commission's part. So again, we just would want to make sure we mesh that with Mr. Kmina's comments there.
D3 suggests providing a live-work unit and or home occupation for the one, I think it should say, or 2 units facing Route 322 in order to provide mixed use. Respond to that suggestion.
Sure. We generally don't allow home occupation in our townhouse communities. But if it's something that the board is inclined, we certainly would be willing to allow a couple of units. We think a couple of those front units, perhaps 1 and 2 in the one building. I would prefer those to be home occupation. I'm not sure, live work is a much more complicated approach to that, but in terms of home occupation, we certainly would be happy to market those units that way and set up the association documents so that those two homeowners are afforded an opportunity to have a home occupation there as well.
Finally, comment E1 references the design guidelines that we provided, which are marked as an exhibit. Exhibit A7. He's asking that the plans be coordinated specifically with the design guidelines and references several sections. Are you able to comply with that suggestion?
Sure, we'd be glad to do that, and I think that's traditionally done through the land development process, so. we'd be happy.
And finally, there was a question about shared, or about parking and overflow parking for events. Could you address that and your thoughts about that?
Sure. While we understand we meet the zoning requirements, we also are sensitive to the fact that we are going to be selling, building, and be the developer with our name attached to this community. So we fully intend to explore other possibilities in terms of the neighboring properties with lease arrangements and the things like that to allow for event parking, overflow parking that we coordinate with our neighbors there. So we're not looking to meet the book and then have our residents there get stuck with long-term issues.
Allison, you just brought that, and I think you're done, yes?
Yes, I am.
That was one of my, my thoughts is, you have your area for stormwater management. And I know you lose green space by taking this away, but stormwater management subsurface with parking on top for overflow parking.
We looked at that possibility coming out of the last hearing. Let me refer back to A5, I believe this is.
Yes.
We did ask the engineer's office to look at that possibility. The simplest way for us to do that would be to provide an access and sort of perpendicular spaces along the entrance drive here. And so do the same thing as you have up here with 4 or 5 spaces along the entrance drive. The grade, under your ordinances, the grade of that road prohibits us to place parking of that style there.
I was more thinking a parking lot, subsurface stormwater management with a paved parking area, an entrance coming in right approximately the first quarter of Unit 1 into the stormwater management area, 4 parking spaces uphill, 4 spaces facing 322,
In lieu of the green.
in lieu of the green.
But we would have to look at that. We have not evaluated that possibility.
You met with Jim? Did you meet with Jim Worrell?
We did not meet with Jim, no. No, we had worked with him, this was 6 or 8 months ago on the easement agreement. So we did have a telephone conversation with him, and we have not spoken to the hardware property yet.
And then provide a live-work unit, home occupancy for units 1 facing 322. Would that then incur, I don't know this answer, but I'm asking if maybe Scott does or someone here who's one of the engineers, would that require additional parking spaces for that home occupation or live-work unit?
It would require that, yes.
I agree.
That's one of the requirements of the home occupation. It has to description or something similar to that where they're not going to have any traffic. So that depends on the traffic modification.
And then lastly, again, you see where I'm going here, parking. Could you do 2 spots between 11 and 12? I know you said it was too steep of a grade for a public gathering, but could it almost be a continuation of driveways connecting almost 11 and 12 together just for that parking spot there, with a small retaining wall, again, for seating in front of those, but it would also be an elevation stop?
Right. We have not looked at that, but we would be willing to look at that possibility. Yep, that would introduce possibility for 2 additional spaces there, yep.
Were you in agreement to get rid of one of the units on the first, towards 1 through 6 per Tom's recommendation?
I guess, number one, I disagree with Tom's statement that there's a compatibility issue, which seems to be his argument. There's not a zoning requirement to have 5 versus 6 in that frontage. What I then was doing was sort of saying, even if we all agree that there was a requirement to remove that unit, I can't remove 1 unit in the middle.
But if you do subsurface water, stormwater treatment, and you do an area for like pedestrian amenities, Village Green in that area, that open space would have to be 10% of your gross lot, and you would lose a unit anyway. I think that would bring you down to 1.197 acres, I believe.
We don't have any formal open space. So I think what you're speaking to is the stormwater detention, and we're just looking
grass
to.
for like people to meet and play.
We're looking to create a dual use of that area. So, the conversations we had through the planning process was, let's not just make it a hole in the ground, let's make sure that aesthetically it is a grass area, yes.
My last question, only because I'm dealing with it right now, in the Pulte development, what would your barrier be between units? Maybe you haven't gotten this far in the design aspects of the construction, but would you have a concrete foundation wall separating basements?
Concrete separating basements is your
Separating
question?
basements. So in other words, would this be a poured foundation not your basements, for your lower level? Because I think you're coming in at first level, correct?
Yes, sir, yep.
So what is your barrier going to be between the units? Just because you have such an abundance of them together, and there's a newer code that's allowing units to be separated by 2 pieces of drywall, 2 5/8 pieces of drywall, and a 2x4 wall with an air gap. That's it.
We use a higher specification than for our separation. We do not use concrete for our party walls. We do use an engineered system there for the separation. I will tell you, I have buyers in my townhouse communities that do the stereo test, and they go and they bring a stereo into the unit, and then they go next door and see if they can hear it, and they can.
So today, you're willing to go on record and state that you will have, again, I'm asking this because 5/8 drywall between 2 units, each parting wall has to be 5/8, that's the new code. And it's, in my opinion, it's unacceptable. And God forbid somebody drops a cigarette in unit 1, it just bounces.
Well, the units will be sprinklered.
These are sprinklered in Applecross as well. It just concerns me that, that's the new code, that it allows it to be a 5/8 sheet of drywall between units. So you would be doing what type of a parting wall between units?
You're gonna leave me short as to what the exact specification is, but we get a core core wall unit that we purchase from our vendors, our framing suppliers, that goes up as large sections of core wall that we put between each unit. So it's not a framed separation with drywall attached to each side.
You know what I'm speaking about, right?
So I'm generally familiar with that, yep, yep. But if you would like the specific specification, I'd be happy, I'll have to follow up and
Yeah,
get
I'm
you
putting the
that.
cart before the horse, but I'm just, like I said, that concerns me.
No, that's a practical question, I understand.
I listened to your comments about the history of this project and the discussions with the Historic Commission and the Planning Commission and how you arrived at this particular design, which seemed to be driven more by the site constraints, the slope, than it was the TND guidelines. Would you agree?
I agree.
So what you really said, rather eloquently and to good purpose, was you can't really comply with the TND guidelines. This is as close as you can get to what you think the TND philosophy was.
I think that when I read TND guidelines in general, the reason they're, in my view, not written as a formal ordinance is because every situation is unique, and the design guidelines are guidelines in order that we all pick from what is in fact the whole book and incorporate that as it relates to each site. So in this case, same thing, the idea of having units 5 feet off of Horseshoe Pike. I don't believe, while a possibility under the ordinance, is, in my view, not good planning, even though it's incorporated as a design guideline.
But that is the design guideline for the TND.
Yes, sir.
And so what we really come down to when I look at this is that this plan seems to be more driven by achieving the density that the ordinance would allow, as opposed to the TND guidelines for the type of development they would require.
I don't know that I agree with you on that.
Well, let me ask it this way then. If you were to lose density, do you think you could better achieve more of the design guidelines?
I'm not sure which guideline specifically I'm not meeting.
Rear-facing garages.
Side yards.
What I indicated is the idea of rear-facing garages is a function of how tall the buildings you want to have along 322.
Well, we also have building height limitations, so you can't just keep going up. So you're really constrained because of the topography of this site. Are you not?
We're all constrained by this topography and the locations of our sites.
Right. You made a comment about Mr. Comita's comment on the massing, and you related it to, your justification for this mass was that you related it to the commercial buildings on either side of this site, not to the TND guidelines.
Because I believe that Mr. Comita's comment spoke specifically to the existing structures in the village.
Well, and you're assuming that it's the existing commercial structures on either side of this property and not the other residential structures that are within the village.
Because I believe there's a very different character to the one side of Horseshoe Pike than to the other.
Well, in that the east side of Horseshoe Pike, at least right now, on either side of your site, has 2 commercial properties.
Correct.
The other side has, I'll characterize them as adaptive reuses and then some commercial as well. but they're residents that were, in some respects, adapted to commercial uses, but remain residential structures.
Correct. The older structures primarily of the village there, yep.
You mentioned the home occupation. Do your HOA documents typically prohibit home occupations within the homes?
High impact, yes. We don't prohibit somebody from working out of their home. We prohibit them from having employees or retail activity out of their homes.
All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
I have a question. The Historical Commission minutes, well, I marked to the board exhibit B12, and there's a letter from the Historical Commission of April 16th, 2018, and they talk about the review of your architectural renderings. Are those the renderings that you've marked as exhibit A8? Is that what was being reviewed by the Historical Commission?
Yes.
Okay. So you're saying there's a disconnect between the Historical Commission recommendation saying they like A8 and then what Mr. Commit is saying about the white garage doors and bay windows?
There may be a quick consensus. I'm just suggesting that there was a number of rounds of back and forth with the commission in terms of feedback on, I mean, in essence, they picked the colors for the elevations and a number of the variations and worked with our architect on those. I just don't want to set up a situation where I'm saying that I'm agreeing with Mr. Committa as being right or the commission. I'm just saying that
And was there a specific conversation with the Historical Commission about white garage doors?
I don't recall.
Oh, okay.
I was not
The
at all
chairman's
those,
back
I was
there,
not at all those meetings, so I
Okay,
apologize.
yeah, I just didn't know, I mean, I have been through that process, and I know that they got to that level of detail, so I was wondering if specifically on this case, they got to the level of detail of the color of the garage doors,
Right.
and you don't know.
I don't recall what they said.
No, I'm not jaded, I'm just making a comment. No,
We were
no,
tougher on her.
6 meetings tougher. But-
As far as the last sentence in that same paragraph, it says, the architect reported that his client was open to lowering the retaining walls. I believe that, you'd said that it's impossible to lower the retaining walls, the site would be constrained to that?
Those heights are required for grading purposes.
Okay.
Why no tier? Why can't we do a tier there?
The,
setback.
at some point in the design discussion, I think it involved your traffic engineer, that road was widened from 18 feet to 20 feet, which again was exceeding the minimum, but we were happy to do that. That leaves us only a 3-foot separation from the curb. This is the internal curb. So this cartway here in
Yep.
front of 1 through 6 is 20. We then have the vertical curb. We then have a 3-foot grass strip. And then you have the retaining wall, which then drops down to grade that is about a foot off of the PennDOT right-of-way. So the stepped wall idea would require that wall to either push the street narrower or project into the PennDOT right-of-way.
So you still have a foot, right?
We have a foot, yes, sir. Yes, we do.
Not that that's, and so
But
taking,
that, I'm sorry.
no, I was just thinking, taking the foot that you still have, the blocks are about a foot, or they're about 10 inches, and then you have a foot with the cap. You could do it, you would just have to abut them to each other
Well, it had to
for
be,
seating
had to be
purposes.
11 inches, because the sidewalk has to be 4 foot 6 inches. Instead of 4 foot 5. I'm just saying.
I'm going back to the seating issue. If the wall is 10, it's a 10-inch block and it's an 11-inch cap, so you could do it, it would just be one wall abutting to another, a sitting wall abutting to a retaining wall.
A 12-inch sitting wall.
12-inch, correct.
Yes, yes. And we made an assumption right or wrong that we were looking at an 18 to 24-inch setting wall. So our idea there, again, was benches and landscaping to introduce the sitting concept there.
But on, where would you put the benches on the walkway?
What we would do is introduce it where we've had the grass strip, because the sidewalk out here is set back from, I think it's 5.5 feet from the face of the wall. So at a couple of places along the sidewalk, we would have a concrete inset so we could place benches. Or I mean, it could look like a seating wall. It just would not be integral to the wall that's there now. It would be a bench of some sort. But we're not proposing that that be the whole length of the wall.
I have nothing.
Nor do I.
Okay. Any of the parties have questions? Mr. Penders?
No other question?
You talked about the trash trucks. Are the trash trucks going to go inside?
Yes, it would be private trash service with individual service to each home, yes.
But how will they turn, please?
They would turn around turn at either end of the neighborhood.
But how long are those trucks?
I don't know.
So the width is only 20 feet. So how are they going to turn is a problem. Thank you.
Anybody else?
So I still have a question about overflow parking. So I think you had said that you plan on negotiating an alternative option. I would assume that would have to be either on either side of the property, either leasing space from Village Hardware or leasing space from the Guthriesville Village Plaza. I'm not sure what it's called. Have you had a conversation with either of those entities?
We had a preliminary conversation with one of those entities, but again, in the context of this hearing, we felt we met the zoning requirements, so it was something we were going to look at in more detail at land development.
How did that initial meeting go?
It hasn't been resolved yet, so.
Okay. I mean, is it safe to assume that outside of those two locations, there really is no other option that you could lease overflow parking?
Not that we've seen out of the gate, no.
Okay. Do you think that the overflow parking will be an issue in general if someone were to have a social function?
I don't know that it's a major problem, no.
So you have are you done?
Oh, just from a taxpayer perspective, did you guys pay an effluent fluid storage fee? Yeah, it was just something I'm not even 100% sure what it is myself. I was like researching some stuff, and it was just
I think
curious.
what he may be referring to, and I'm guessing here, but are you asking, did they pay a capacity fee to reserve sewage capacity?
Yes,
What he's
I
asking.
thought it was
That's
called
what
an
he's
effluent storage fee.
I've been here too long, I know.
You call it the Agway, too. We have not paid a capacity reservation fee, no.
Is that a requirement for the project?
No, I mean, they'll have to demonstrate that they can get sufficient capacity, but that's not something, they weren't required, nobody's required, and I don't think the authority would even grant it unless there was proposed development coming forward.
Thank you.
So after my next question for Mr. Penders, we are going to be able to address the township in a statement?
Yeah, you'll be able to present whatever evidence you'd like.
Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, so the one question was, wow, I can't even read my handwriting. Yeah, you'd mentioned that you typically do not do live work. What, other than typically, what else is keeping you from the live work units besides the grading? Because there are ways of plans being adjusted to make the back-facing garages, rear entry, whatever, and additional parking required for live work. Going back to Mr. Fisher's question, is it seems that density is the driver here, maximizing every bit of space, fighting to get the green space removed, open space removed, so you can put as much as possible into the area. What other reason do you have to not break from your typical live-work unit development or requirement that we want?
That would not allow? I'm
Yeah,
not sure I
other than
understand
you-
what you're...
Other than you typically not doing something, other than trying to maximize density and profitability, obviously, which is the driver here, what else is keeping you from agreeing to making these live work?
A, live work is a higher impact use, and
Or something
B,
similar.
live work has a number of financing issues that we faced since the downturn, because you're introducing a commercial and a residential use. So most times it's not a conforming loan under the federal requirements.
So
So
how
a
is it-
lot of the live work units have struggled because you have to get unconventional financing when you have a true work zoning in that unit that's tied in under the same fee simple deed as the residential unit.
And I think also, I mean, I don't think our zoning ordinance calls live work. I mean, if it's a home occupation under the zoning ordinance standards, you do, I checked because Mr. Pearsall mentioned it, the ordinance would require additional parking.
How about handicap parking?
Yes.
It's on
Those
the
are,
rules,
those
yeah.
are my points is, so whether we call it live work, and I apologize if live work is a trademark, separate thing, but making this commercial and residential, much like Eagle View, which is, they're successful in Eagle View having those units, which is another community up the road, and another neighboring township. So I don't see why a home occupation, living more to what we consider like the master plan of the town, to have these units be part of a walking community. We could leave Hopewell, our development, walk down, hit the stores, or buy products, services from these buildings. Other than maximizing density, the maximum amount of space utilized for these homes, I don't see any other, what other reason is there not to try to reduce the number of homes and make the home occupancy work?
Because the TND provides for townhouse uses with no requirement for any kind of mixed-use component.
But that's not a I mean,
And
that's
the
a within.
TND ordinance has a high density in conjunction with a very high standard for design. So there's a lot of design criteria that have gone into the plans that we've presented in the last couple of hearings and will go into the implementation of the land development and the build that go above and beyond other neighborhoods that you may see in the Downingtown area. And that's a function of the design criteria for the Downingtown, or for the TND 1 ordinance here, is higher level of texture, feel, character to the community in conjunction with density. Okay?
Understood.
Home occupation itself, to me, is in conflict, and not again, somebody working out of their home specifically, who is on the computer, on the phone, doing business, but introducing a retail component, all right, is a very different design and is not compatible. We prohibit it in other places because it is going to be an unnecessary burden on the other people that are living there. They go to work and then they're coming home. They don't want to come home necessarily to a commercial or quasi-commercial setting.
But there's no, so those are just, again, typicals. There's nothing driving other than maximizing and benefiting on the property for the dollar. I get it. You're gonna make a more immediate impact with 15 homes. You're gonna get more money, whatever it may be. I understand that. But yeah, I'm not getting the answer, and I think I'll address it with the board.
Yeah, I mean, I
that's the
think
best
what
way
he's
to do it.
saying to you is that there's conflicting provisions in the ordinance as far as he's concerned, because the density for the townhomes in the TND1 allows him to have 15 townhomes. And he's
Understand.
telling you that if he has to meet the design guidelines and do what the Historical Commission has asked him to do with the architectural renderings, there's a certain cost to that. And so for him to comply with that, provide the street walls, I'm not making the argument, I'm just saying this is what I think he's saying.
That's what I want to hear.
Yeah.
It's money. That's what I want to hear.
Well, I mean, it's very expensive to do, what he's telling you is it's expensive to do what your TND design guidelines want you to do for townhomes.
All right.
So, that's what he's saying.
That's the answer that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think to one point, I just want to say is that he's right in that, I think a couple people have commented that, oh, well, we envisioned it to be a mixed use. The ordinance doesn't mandate that. It allows them to do a multifamily with no mixed use.
I understand. I
So,
don't.
I just want to make sure that's very clear, because I don't want anyone to get angry if it's an approval that is for only a residential, because the ordinance allows that.
I understand.
And there are commercial and retail spaces within walking distance of Guthriesville Walk, of our proposed project. And I would rather, if there's demand today for additional retail and use of office, I'd rather drive that to the Laird Building, and I'd rather drive it to my neighbor than to be competing with them with additional retail here. All right? I think it's important that we fill the spaces at all the centers around here and not just be adding extra square footage of retail or office space.
I think, yeah.
That was my only question. Thank you, John.
Okay, are we done with questions?
Yes.
So how long do the parties think they need to present what they'd like to present?
How long is it going to take you to read that? Mine's going to be 2 minutes.
Okay.
Not even.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have anything you want to say in summation?
What is your pleasure,
Yeah.
you wanted?
You guys want to go
I
first
think-
or no?
I request to move my exhibits into
Sure.
evidence.
Yep.
Request to move my exhibits.
So admitted.
Thank you.
So maybe we've finished
I'm
the
gonna let these guys
questions.
talk first if they want to talk.
Give them till
We got
10
6
o'clock.
minutes.
They're not going to cut us off at this point.
I mean, if
got
Geraldine would be another 5 minutes, I hate to have to call another hearing. to do
Yeah,
that.
and bring everybody
That's
else
why I
back
asked
out
how
here.
long they were gonna be, if they're gonna be a total of, maybe we say we'll give it to them.
They're going to cut it off.
They're not going to cut it off.
She's talking about it right now.
Otherwise, you're gonna be calling here.
Made it clear. It's
Fine.
not gonna take 2 minutes. Get it done. We gotta get it done.
Okay?
2 minutes turns into 20.
Well, and then the other thing you could do, you could do it,
Right. Gotcha.
yeah, you could do that, or you could do it right before, that would work.
That way just closing before?
7:30, you could do it at 7 the night before. What is it, June 21st, is that your next meeting?
Yeah.
You could do that, you'll just do that, it'll be fresh and bread.
Well,
I don't
and,
really care.
I'm just saying.
What did you say?
I don't really care, I'm just saying.
Okay.
I know that,
What did you, I mean, I don't disagree that 2
Let's
turns
hear,
into 20.
if it goes a little over 10, I think that's.
I only need 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think the board would really like to try to wrap this up, so
Yeah,
why don't we start?
I'll take
and-
5 minutes
Okay,
right now.
all right, here we go.
So obviously, I mean, I'm allowed, this doesn't have to be formed in a question, right?
No, no, this is your testimony.
I'm allowed
And
to say
It's up to Allison whether she wants this to be, do you want this to be sworn
Terrific.
in?
What is now?
Okay, she
I
wants
mean-
it to be sworn in, so just stand and raise your hand for the court reporter swearing in.
Providing your own testimony.
Absolutely.
And why doesn't everybody just stand, all the parties? The parties who are gonna talk.
Like a citizenship thing.
I just want to make sure we have ample time to say what I want to say.
Well, if you don't feel that you have, then what we'll do is we'll schedule another time. So if you are a party and you're going to, if you've been admitted as a party,
And just
do
real
it.
quick, the thought process was what we were just
It'll be 5
talking
minutes,
about
5 minutes,
was
5 minutes,
if,
5 minutes.
if it goes over, what we'll do is we'll, you know, again, it seems like our next meeting might be a 5-minute hearing. So maybe what we would try and do is turn that hearing into a regular Board of Supervisors meeting before 5, 10 minutes, after, whatever.
Yeah.
That's what we were alluding to.
I just want to say what I have to say as a matter of record
Okay,
tonight.
everybody
and I
raise
will-
their right hand, and
done. And
she
that's-
has your names.
And your
Are
left-
you right,
left
Jen?
foot.
Okay.
I do.
Okay,
I do.
so Mr. Polly's your first.
Sure. Two quick things, just a question for the board. I mean, obviously, as a brand-new resident to East Brandywine Township, I was obviously very surprised when I found out that 15 townhomes were going to be hopefully not built right behind my house. I have a lot of issues with, my children and the density of that many people being right there and parking on my street. So from a pure family man perspective, I oppose the project. Is it safe to say that I guess I asked the question of the applicant, is it safe to say that this project is being opposed by myself and my neighbors? Well, I mean, do you agree that we're here in opposition?
That's something that you have to make.
Okay, well, we're here in opposition. And I think the board would agree that we're here in opposition as well. There's an interesting ruling that's recently come through the Commonwealth Court system. It was Lake McLeod Homeowners Association versus Pine Township Board of Supervisors. And it's a very similar case to this, and it's dated March the 12th, 2018, so it's very fresh. Essentially, and once again, I'm a layman, but if a project is in a conditional use setting, if a project is in front of a Board of Supervisors and it is opposed, the Board of Supervisors cannot grant subdivision and land development ordinance waivers in a contested development unless a hardship can be demonstrated by the developer. And I don't know if they significantly or sufficiently really proven that they have a hardship.
We'll look at that case, okay?
Thank you.
Sure, we appreciate you doing the research. Mr. Brown? did
Yeah,
you-
I'll be very brief. First, I want to take 30 seconds to thank everyone in this room, the members of this Board of Supervisors, Kristen, you, Luke, Scott, reporter, your name has escaped me, I apologize, for giving us these set of days to hear us, to ask questions so that you can understand our concerns, what we're educating ourselves on, because we are concerned citizens with what is going on in our township. We have a lot of concerns. I understand and validate, and I also want to thank Ms. Zorro, Mr. Seidel, Mr. Williams, and Mr. Daly for listening to us and answering our questions and coming 2 different nights, and for the time that you spent with us prior to the hearings. We appreciate what you're trying to do for your business and with your engineers and everyone that supported that. That being said, we have an issue and concern with traffic in general, not necessarily the additional traffic here, not necessarily this development. We have a concern with how our township is represented by those that go through it, those that want to move in, and between the traffic with the daycare, the new townhouses coming in, the numbers that were provided, those are shocking numbers for the size of this area and this community. You have to understand that there's morning rush hour times, and those are significant 1-hour pieces, items of traffic for this area in a very small amount of space that is affected by these lights. I understand it may be a PennDOT issue. Those are things that we need to address immediately, and I think that with the traffic and with the what is going to be proposed, that density, I understand that there's leeway. It's not vague, it's broad, what that zoning allows for. And I think there is room for the board to not continue for once, not perceived for once, to allow more zoning ordinance changes be accepted, to not just grant development proposals through delays or whatever the other methods were, it's okay for this board to say no. We want to see another plan. Our town people want to see another plan. There is no real basis other than we are permitted, since you've granted no open space, they're now permitted to squeeze what may look nice on the outside in a plan. They're going to squeeze that into an area that really shouldn't be 15 townhomes worth. Okay, I'd be fine if it was 8 live home work. A lot of people would. I want you to understand that we have a right to be opposed to this and that you have a duty to do what's best for this township. And it may not be 15 townhomes. It's not. It's probably less. And if it costs more money to come back with a different plan, that is the condition that we need. Not just, well, they are living to the guidelines, let's squeeze them in there. You're allowed to say no, because that zoning is broad. All right? You have the right. It's just because they're spending money isn't my problem. It's not your problem. Right? So please consider that. That's our biggest driver. We know that land is going to get filled. We're not opposed to Rouse doing something there. We're opposed to 15 townhomes being shoved in there. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, if you could use the mic, I'm sorry. Thank you, Jovan.
So my opposition to the project is a variety of factors. One of those which were not mentioned is that it is, maybe can be argued, but it is my belief that most of these parking situations that will be created as part of this project will be resolved by using the Hopewell development as the backstop. There is a walkway that connects this development to those roads, and as human nature as it is, I believe that most of that overflow parking will end up on the streets of the Hopewell development. Furthermore, there is no open space on 15 townhomes. All those children that want to play, run around, has no place, absolutely zero grounds to do that in, and with a connected walkway to the Hopewell development. So it's human nature that most of the defects will be absorbed in this case by the Hopewell development, and most of the gains will be absorbed by the Rouse Chamberlin Institute. That is not fair to me as a home buyer in the Hopewell development. I see it as a perceived loss of value to my property, this development. It is a hindrance or a hardship on every commuter on 322, whether you agree with whosever view of what the traffic will be, whether it's actual view that's provided by an actual resident in this that uses 322, or by numbers that are calculated. I live here. This is my reality. The Board of Supervisors will be doing me a disservice by approving this development and at the gain of Rouse Chamberlin. So I humbly request that you consider the, furthermore, one more point is that there is no comparable development in East Brandywine to this development. There is none, and there's not even half the density that's proposed in this project. And while Rouse Chamberlin might be able to prove that it might meet the letter of the law of either the master plan or the guideline, you don't need to have a lot of clear thinking to understand that this is trying to squeeze as much dollars out of a plot of land, and that is all, and to do the least possible to be able to put that through as many hurdles that's being presented. So I humbly request that you do the right thing by the homeowners of Hopewell and East Brandywine Township, and for all the commuters that use 322 and will be using 322, and reject this plan. Thank you.
board members and everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to and allow me to speak as well. Thank you. In 2003, when I bought the house in Hopewell, except the Hopewell community, everything else was cornfields here, across the street, here, everywhere. Now, we are very happy about the growth. That's very important. We are very happy about the growth of the township. I am very happy to welcome new residents into this neighborhood. We are not opposed to that. We welcome people. We want them to come in because of our school district and because of the wonderful community here, low crime rate, and everything is beautiful, everything is nature-oriented. We have so many parks. We are very happy about that. But we have grown to a place. Now we have to be careful what we are growing to. What is going to be our future? It's very important. We welcome growth, but in a controlled manner. I now live in a house which has got 1 acre lot. And I cannot imagine putting 15 houses into 1.3 acre lot. I cannot imagine how the plan has come and how can they do it. I really can't understand. I can imagine if you can put in 5 houses, that is reasonable, but not 15 houses. Again, I have 1 house on 1 acre lot. I cannot imagine 15 houses on 1.3 acre. As our elected representatives, I kindly, humbly request you to take all these things into consideration before making a decision. When I have a party in my house, I receive minimum 25 cars. When he has a party, he has received another 25 cars. We could manage it on Montpelier Drive, Wellesley Lane, and Cherry Grove Lane. When any of these people receive even one small birthday party, I can't understand where they're going to park. There is no parking place. And where are the kids going to play around the community? There is no playing area. They all, for parking purposes and for playing, they are going to come into Cherry Grove Lane, which is Hopewell community. And I don't understand, or I don't know whether this is possible, whether you can put up a sign in our community saying only Hopewell residents are allowed to enter this community. Can we do that? If we can do that, I'm open to having 15 houses. If we cannot do that, if we see that as a common road, then obviously we cannot allow these kids to come there and play, which is going to cause confusion. There's going to be robbery. We have experienced that in the past from kids coming across from other communities doing robbery in our community. We have seen that in the past 14 years. We cannot let that happen. And I asked about school bus. School bus safety is very, very important to the kids. I cannot imagine a school bus stopping in 322, putting up a stop sign, and then there is no median. There is going to be a person with cuckoo in the head. He's going to just drive past them, and somebody will get hit. And I cannot imagine the time it's going to take to onload and to offload kids from 15 townhouses. I cannot imagine how much of time it's going to take. I gave you the real statistics. I've been living in that community for 14 years. It used to take me 8 minutes to get to the church and to the Downingtown West campus until 2014. Now it takes me 38 minutes in the morning. I cannot imagine with additional 15 houses there, what is going to happen. Already people are frustrated and they're all planning to move out of this township. I have been already getting feedback. They want to move out because they cannot put up with 322. So that I kindly request you to take that into consideration as well. Besides that, the houses on our Hopewell community are sold in 475K to 525K. And I can assure you, Rouse and Chamberlin is going to sell it in the maximum of 250 to 300K. It is going to bring down the value of our prices, which we have invested in 14 years ago. The lifetime investment what we have made is going to be brought down. And much more, I'm also worried about the safety of the people who are going to buy those houses. They're going to come down here because of 2 things. One, just because of the school district, because ours is a great school district with STEM Academy. Second, this township is good. These are the only 2 things that the people are going to know, but the people who are going to come after they buy and move in, they're going to be in a sticker shock. They bought into a community where they cannot move around, where their cars cannot come out, where they cannot park. They've sacrificed the safety of their children, and God forbid if the fire accident, the fire truck cannot even reach the last townhouse on time. So it compromises the safety of the families and of the children. That is all I would like to say. And as I said, we welcome new people. We want people to come in. This is a very good neighborhood, and I've raised my family here, and I've contributed towards the township and to the local senior citizens living place. I'm a volunteer in several associations, and I'm happy to continue to volunteer for our township. But the only thing is that we have to be careful in the number of families just because of the safety of everybody here and for the new residents as well. It need not be 15, it can be 5. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. I think we are done with the evidentiary portion of the hearing. Under the state law, the board has 45 days to render a decision, and that decision has to be done at a public meeting. So we'll look at the calendar and see when the 45 days hits and can notify the parties. I'll send email communication for when the board will be rendering its decision. Okay, thank you, everybody.
I just have one, can I have a question? So as part of that process, if there's any further communication between the applicant and the board,
There can't be.
so there's nothing?
There can be no more communication. The board can only render its decision based on what was provided at these conditional use hearings. There can be no further communication.
Okay.
And if there was communication that occurred, you know, if a board member, for example, went to a planning commission meeting, that can't be considered either. It can only be what she has transcribed. That's why it's so important for her to get every word, because that's the only thing that the decision can be based on. Okay?
Thank you, board.
Thank you.
Thank you.